Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Golden Knights, in which the Sharks lost 7-3. This is now the third regulation loss in a row, all three of those at home, so a 0-3 homestand as the Sharks will head back on the road on Thursday. And it's another loss to the Golden Knights. The Sharks now have lost in 13 games ever against the Golden Knights. Of course, they are a new team from last year. The Sharks have only won 4 of those games, 2 of those going to overtime, including one that went to double overtime in the playoffs. So the Sharks clearly not having the best of matchups versus the Golden Knights. And the Golden Knights seem to just play well against the Sharks and also get some Vegas magic against this team. It seems like they keep hitting the lucky 7 straight every single time, basically. As, like you flip the slots and you get the 7s in a row. The Golden Knights seem to get that. I mean, just take a look at their goals. The Sharks came out with a fantastic first shift. They get the first goal. It's Logan Couture's 25th. Sharks with the 1-0 lead, but on the first Knights goal, William Karlsson with the breakaway. Couture diving poke check play ends up poking this puck back to Karlsson after he loses it. They score there. Then it's Mark Stone. A pass from Riley Smith hits off the skate of Vlasic, goes right back to him, fools Martin Jones. There's another tap-in goal. Joe Thornton does score on a pretty bad one by Malcolm Subban to let in, but then it's Marchessault on a weird play with like a poke check by Braun that misses, and then Marchessault loses the puck but gets it back. It was this whole strange sequence of plays, but a pretty soft goal let in by Martin Jones as well. Aaron Dell steps in. That's the end of the first period. Second period, the only goal scored is by the Knights, and it's another pretty lucky one. Hits a body in front, bounces right next to Paul Stastny. He's able to put it in, and it's a 4-2 game for the Knights. Make it 5-2 in the third period early on when Riley Smith scores, while it becomes 5-3 with a Couture goal, although I think this might end up going to Hurdle, but a Couture goal nonetheless, at least at the moment of filming. Makes it close 5-3, but then it's put out of reach with a Marchessault empty net, as well as a Cody Eakin power play goal to make it 6-3 and then 7-3. So the Vegas magic was there, and the Sharks played an okay game at times. They certainly showed flashes. They had you could probably point to multiple times where they were in the offensive zone just dominating the Golden Knights, but it just wasn't a consistent effort from the Sharks throughout the night. And the Golden Knights didn't have a consistent effort, but they were able to convert on the chances they got. They got the bounces, as I said, and they managed to put 6 past Sharks goaltenders and 7 in general. First thing to talk about would be Jones and Dell. Jones, of course, starting this game as you'd expect against a team like the Golden Knights, and the second one, he certainly had no chance on, the Mark Stone one. The first one is one of those that, you would like to see. It wasn't an easy save for Martin Jones to make by any means, but, if you're going to succeed in the playoffs, you want to see your starting goaltender make a save like this, and Martin Jones didn't do that, especially after your team just had such a great start to the game. And, Couture makes a bit of a misplay here with this diving poke check. You want to see Jones come up with the big save, and it didn't happen. The third one was certainly the final straw, and it ended up being the final straw for Peter DeBoer. Not a good one, even if it was a strange play with what happened with Marchessault and Justin Braun, so he gets the boot. Aaron Dell steps in and is actually pretty good here, honestly enough. I really haven't complimented Aaron Dell much this season, but he comes in and he does a formidable job. Yeah, he let in a couple goals at sort of deflating moments, to make it 4-2 and put it out of 1 goal reach, make it 5-2 early in the third, but he basically had no chance in them. I mean, the Sharks were serving up golden opportunities on a silver platter. The Stastny one, not so much, but definitely the Riley Smith one. There were also multiple times late in the third period when the Sharks were pushing to get a goal to bring it to within 1. Aaron Dell had to come up with huge saves for them to just keep them alive. On the Marchessault breakaway certainly stands out. And so Dell, I thought, had a pretty solid game in general, coming in for relief of Martin Jones, but it really just was not enough. The defense just wasn't that good tonight. Next, I'll talk about the third line, where if there is a bright spot for the Sharks, is that once again the Sorensen, Thornton, LeBanc line was absolutely maybe I shouldn't say absolutely fantastic, but was quite good. Certainly the best line for the Sharks tonight, and you could tell that DeBoer really liked how they were rolling. I mean, this was the line that he was really leaning on late in the third period when they were trying to get the 2 goals, because Kane wasn't playing that well. Donskoy was playing okay, but not as well as you would expect after the healthy scratch. Nyquist wasn't that apparent. Meyer wasn't that apparent. And so, it was really Thornton, Sorensen, LeBanc. And while they technically didn't score as a line, because Thornton's goal, I don't believe, involved Sorensen or LeBanc, even on the ice, they were pretty impactful, which is, I guess, nice to see. Logan Couture is the next person I want to talk about. I really liked his compete level in this game. It wasn't a perfect game by any means, but I really like how he sort of commits to these games. Now, you could definitely say about Couture as a criticism in that he's not always 100% dialed into every game, which is quite ironic because he's also one of those players who will go to the media and say, oh, well, these players just aren't playing at a high enough level. And it's not to say Couture isn't playing at a high level consistently. He seems to always be somewhat locked in defensively, but you could tell he's never really giving 100% until these games that do matter come. And I guess that's still okay because when it comes to the playoffs, Logan Couture is probably one of the best Sharks forwards there are. I mean, he was great in the playoffs last season. He was, the Sharks MVP, excluding Martin Jones during that Stanley Cup run a few years back. And so when the games matter, like they did tonight, he definitely showed up. You could tell he was wearing his heart on his sleeve there. You could tell he was so angry when, even just simple things like offsides and the too many men on the ice penalty. He was really involved in this game. And again, not a perfect game for Logan Couture. I mean, I believe he was -3 by the end of the night, but I did like how involved he was emotionally. Next, I'll talk about the Braun-Dillon pair, and in the past month or so when I've brought these two up, I've been praising them, but definitely not going to be the case here tonight. Braun and Dillon, really rough one. Brendan Dillon, I thought, would really excel in this game because he's made such strides to his game defensively this season, and he still has obviously that physical aspect, so I really thought he'd be able to do a good job here defending against the Golden Knights, but he basically reverted to 2016 Brendan Dillon, where he was just somewhat physical, but also just getting skated around, and he felt pressured to make plays, even though he could just make the simple play. I thought Justin Braun was no better at all. You could even argue Braun was worse than Dillon in this game. Some pretty weak plays from Justin Braun as well, so just not a very good defensive pairing here tonight. Finally, just a few words I want to say, because I know a lot of people are somewhat worried about this, and I didn't mention this after the Florida game, and I didn't mention this after the Nashville game, because while there were people saying, oh, those weren't good games from the Sharks, it's basically the next morning you wake up and you basically look past it. The Florida Panthers, some random team in the Eastern Conference, Sharks are not going to play them again this season. Comes to the Predators, the Sharks have historically had good playoff success versus the Predators. They had already won 2 games versus them this season. But when it comes to the Golden Knights, as I said, only 4 wins ever in 13 games against them. This is a team that they've already been blown out by 6-0. This is the team that eliminated them from the playoffs last season. Every single Sharks fan wanted to see a big statement game here tonight, and they didn't really get that with this 7-3 defeat. And as such, a lot of Sharks fans are beginning to worry that if the Sharks do end up facing the Golden Knights in the first round, which is definitely a possibility, and it's probably the most likely opponent at the moment for the Sharks, depending on how the Calgary Flames do in their last 10 games of the season, that a lot of people are worried that the Sharks are just going to lose in the first round, which would be a huge disappointment. But I do want to, maybe lighten up on those worries, because I think the first thing to remember in this game is while Shemek is injured and he's probably not going to be back at any point this season, at least to face off against the Golden Knights, you do have to recall that Joe Pavelski and Erik Karlsson, key members for the Sharks, were not playing in this game. When it comes to Erik Karlsson, he should be back for the playoffs. When it comes to Joe Pavelski, he may even be back for the next matchup against the Golden Knights. And Pavelski, leading goal scorer, captain of the team. Erik Karlsson, I'm sure a lot of analysts on the outside of the Sharks will say that Erik Karlsson is the Sharks' best player. And so him being out with injury is certainly a huge loss for the Sharks, even if it hasn't always been the case this season. And you could argue that the Golden Knights also weren't at full power because Marc-Andre Fleury for them was injured. But when it comes to Fleury over Subban, it's Subban was good in this game, but you could say Fleury would let in maybe just 2 goals instead of the 3. While in the Sharks' case, you can't really predict how the score would play out with Pavelski and with Karlsson in the lineup. And so the Sharks were not at full power, not to make any sort of excuses for the San Jose Sharks, but still. And so while the Golden Knights have gotten significantly better in certain areas than they were last season, because they replaced David Perron, a decent second line forward, with Mark Stone, who's a bona fide superstar on the first line. They replaced inconsistent James Neal, who has basically fallen off a cliff this season, with Max Pacioretty, who's a pretty solid second liner. And they replaced Erik Haula, who's I believe not going to play another game this season due to injury, with Paul Stasny, who I would say is a more consistent second line center. So they have obviously made strides on paper, but you also have to take into account that this was a team that was riding a lot of career years last season. William Karlsson's not anywhere close to 40 goals this season. Marchessault's not anywhere close to 80 points this season. Riley Smith is also off his point per game pace that he was at last season. So some of their players also took some step backs. And Marc-Andre Fleury, who was so good for the Sharks, for the Golden Knights in the regular season last season, and especially in the playoffs. He's leading the league in wins, I still believe, and I believe he's leading the league in shutouts as well. But his stats aren't necessarily there. It has been rocky at times, and Fleury historically hasn't always been the most consistent goaltender. So I don't think it's really out of the realm of possibility that the Sharks can take advantage of that. And you have to look on the Sharks side. They are also a significantly better team than they were last season with the addition of Erik Karlsson. And while some of the players for the Golden Knights are sort of trending downwards from where they were last season, even if Marchessault, Karlsson, and Smith are still great players, a lot of the Sharks players are trending upwards. I mean, Evander Kane was mostly injured during the series against the Golden Knights. He should hopefully be at a strong level come that time. Meyer is having a career year. Hurdle is having a career year. LeBanc is having a career year. Thornton is playing very well, and he wasn't in the series last season. And so I think that there are factors for the Sharks that are going in their favor. I think that the Golden Knights, while I would say they are definitely a better team than they were last season, they're not an unbeatable juggernaut. While I do think they're also more dangerous than the Calgary Flames in the playoffs, as I said, not an unbeatable juggernaut. I think the Sharks can do it even if they are down 2-1 in the season series, and the 2 losses have been somewhat embarrassing. And so for a lot of people who right now are worrying and how that the Sharks are not going to be able to beat the Golden Knights, and it's going to be another disappointing season for the San Jose Sharks as they'll fail to win the Stanley Cup, I do think you might need to hold back on those things. Teams lose 3 games in a row. At least every team that isn't the Tampa Bay Lightning lose 3 games in a row. I mean, the main reason why the Sharks are even close to the Pacific Division title at this point, even within a single point of Calgary, you have to recall a few weeks ago the Sharks didn't seem like they were that close to that point. They were, at 9 points behind at some point, but it was the Flames who lost pretty consistently in a row to allow the Sharks to come back in that area. And I'm sure there were Flames fans who were also feeling that the sky was falling and that the Flames weren't the real deal and that they were an illusion and everything like that. But they've come back and they retained their spot at the top here, and the Sharks will come back as well. They're not going to lose the rest of the games of the year, and so I think the worries right now are definitely premature. The power play is still 6th in the league, or at least it was coming into tonight. Yes, it hasn't looked that good in the past few games, but Erik Karlsson coming back, Joe Pavelski coming back should help that, even if Pavelski was there for a lot of those weaker games. The penalty kill, yes, it also has looked definitely shaky for a lot longer than the power play, honestly, and maybe this is something to be a bit more worried about, but I do still have faith in that, and I do also still have faith in Martin Jones. Even though he didn't have a very good game here tonight, he is a player who shows up when it counts, and while this game, you could argue, did count a lot because it is the Golden Knights, when it comes to the playoffs, I hope to see a better performance from Martin Jones, and I believe he'll be able to do it. And so yeah, there's worries here, or at least there seems to be worries here, but I would suggest having a lot more faith in this Sharks squad because they have shown a lot of promise during this season. I still think they can make a good run at the end of it. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday. As I said, they'll hit the road. They'll face off against the Kings and Ducks in a back-to-back situation. The Kings on Thursday, the Ducks on Friday. So this was a pretty tough homestand, facing off against the Golden Knights, facing off against the Predators, and even the Florida Panthers, who seem to have the Sharks number as well. But this back-to-back should be a good opportunity to try and get back into the win column. They'll be facing off against I believe the West's 2 worst teams in both the Kings and the Ducks, teams that the Sharks have actually been pretty good versus, at least this season. So they shouldn't have too much trouble there. Hopefully they can get back into the win column. We'll see what Calgary does. I believe they play tomorrow, if they'll stay within 1 point of the Sharks or if they'll pull further ahead. And hopefully on that Thursday or even before that, depending on how the teams play out or the Wild lose or something like that, hopefully the Sharks will clinch that playoff spot finally. Class dismissed.